The first thing Joe McAllister noticed about the slaver ship was the smell. Something between boiled rubber and wet feathers. He wrinkled his nose, but kept the expression polite, non-threatening. The key to surviving in the Galactic Empire's outer rim was to never appear too sharp. People ignored tools. They watched blades. Joe was a tool. Grease-streaked coveralls hung off his wiry frame. His shaggy brown hair stuck out from under a patched-up Terran mechanic's cap, and his fingers were stained a permanent shade of engine black. He moved with the weary gait of a man who had fixed one too many garbage compactors that week, and knew he'd fix 3 more tomorrow. "Hey, monkey!" a guttural voice snapped behind him. "That drone's still sparking. You fixin', or making it worse?" Joe turned, slow, easygoing. "Oh, just coaxing her through a bad mood, boss," he said, tapping the side of the Imperial reconnaissance drone with a wrench. "Girls like her need a gentle hand and a little attention. Kinda like your mama." The guards laughed. Not at the insult, none of them got it, but because Joe said anything at all. Vornak, the lead slaver, snorted, nostrils flaring wide above his needle-thin fangs. He stood tall for a reptilian, with polished blue scales and a spine crest that he thought made him look majestic. Joe thought it made him look like a poorly decorated cake. Vornak leaned in, his breath hot and fishy. "You think you're funny, meat?" Joe smiled, all teeth and Midwestern charm. "Not particularly, sir. Just talkative by nature." Vornak slapped him. The impact snapped Joe's head sideways, but he stayed upright. Blood dribbled from a split lip, and he wiped it off with a finger, inspecting the red smear with detached interest. "Sloppy form," he said cheerfully. "Gotta follow through, otherwise it's just a love tap." More laughter. This time even Vornak cracked a grin. He motioned to the others, who crowded in with eager eyes. "Line him up. We've got downtime. Let's see what noises the monkey makes when we really try." Joe blinked slowly. "Ah, boss. You sure you want to break your favorite mechanic before lunch?" No answer. The guards closed in. The thing about pain, Joe mused, was that you could only feel so much of it before your brain gave up and started playing reruns. Right now his brain had dialed back to a memory of Marla at the beach, wind tugging at her braid, holding a drink with a tiny umbrella. Her laugh was loud, irreverent, dangerous. He smiled at the memory even as booted feet drove into his ribs. "That one sounded hollow," one guard sneered. "Maybe it's where they keep their brains," another joked. They never noticed how Joe watched their movements. How he memorized the weight shift before a punch. How he cataloged species, armor types, dominant limbs. His body was taking notes, even as his mind ran away to sand, sun, and a woman who could break bones with her thumb. Eventually, someone grew bored. The last blow came from Vornak himself, an open palm strike that knocked Joe flat onto the Durasteel floor. Blood pooled under his cheek. A tooth wobbled loose in his mouth. He spat it out and grinned up at the towering slaver. "You hit like a dehydrated grandma," he murmured. "Back on Earth, we call that a high five." Vornak chuckled. "You're a stupid little thing. No wonder your kind got conquered." "Yeah," Joe whispered, more to the floor than anyone. "We're real easy until we're not." He was thrown into a holding cell that smelled worse than the ship. His ribs were broken. Something in his shoulder crunched when he moved. He lay there, silent and smiling faintly. Counting. 1, 2, 3. Not yet. The Empire's outer rim was a graveyard of forgotten laws. It was where the galactic elite sent their dirty secrets and made their dirty money. Slavers. Smugglers. People who thought rules were polite suggestions for someone else. Humans had been discovered late in the galactic game. For a while, no one took them seriously. Pink-skinned apes from a blue marble, loud and primitive. They were entertaining at best. Useful for menial work. Predictable. But predictability was an illusion. One Joe had leaned into for 3 years now. A mechanical chirp broke the silence. A young Skrill officer, feathers groomed, beak polished, peered into the cell with curiosity and a hint of pity. "You do not resist," the Skrill said. "Why?" Joe blinked at the alien. Because I'm fixing things. But you are not fixing machines. You are broken. Sometimes, Joe said. You gotta let a thing break all the way down before you rebuild it better. The Skrill tilted his head, confused. Joe just closed his eyes again. The guards never noticed that their system diagnostics had stopped reporting to Central Command. Or that the hangar doors were 32 seconds slower than yesterday. Or that the auto turrets hadn't completed calibration. Joe had fingers in every console, every panel, every line of code. He'd fixed their systems with Terran precision, and subtly, methodically, ruined them with the same. And no one ever watched the janitor. 2 days passed. Joe worked, limped, fixed drones with his left hand because the right one no longer bent right. He smiled through every order, fetched every tool, never cursed aloud. Then came the knock. The slaver compound buzzed with unusual energy. An unexpected visitor had arrived. An envoy from the Terran Federation. Diplomatic ship, small, sleek, and entirely unarmed. Vornak was amused. He thought it was a peace offering. That Earth was sending flowers and apologies. Joe was welding a plasma valve when the news drifted to him. His helmet hid the slow smile that crept across his face. He finished the weld. Whistled. The guard scoffed. He whistles now. He smells worse too. You ever notice they're always humming? Like they know a joke we don't. Joe didn't answer. He was remembering the exact way her boots sounded on metal decking. The first time Marla McAllister had stepped into a war zone, she was 19. By 24, she had led orbital strikes against a pirate syndicate. 31? She'd ended the siege of Eltron with a 3-squad assault, and a bluff so insane it made the Admiralty nervous. They'd called her a monster. They'd called her a genius. They never called her twice. Joe called her babe. Vornak met the envoy in the central hall, all ego and teeth. She stood like a statue made of thunderclouds. Immaculately dressed in Federation diplomat robes, with a white orchid pin over her chest. She smiled like a scalpel. Joe saw her across the yard. His breath caught. She didn't even look his way, but his heart beat out Morse code. Time to wake up. The guards didn't connect the dots. Why would they? She was a Terran woman. Beautiful. Sharp cheekbones. Clean boots. She looked like someone who'd never changed a fusion coil in her life. They didn't see the weapon under the silk. The guards chuckled as she passed. Some made comments. One offered her a drink. She smiled at each one, storing faces. She asked politely to speak to her husband. Vornak refused, of course. She apologized, of course. But her voice was colder than deep space, and her eyes never blinked. Joe was still in the cell when she came. The guard opened the door like he was doing her a favor. She stepped in. Dismissed him with a wave. Joe sat on the floor, looking worse than most scrap piles. Blood-crusted, bone-bruised, breathing shallow. Hey, gorgeous, he rasped. She knelt beside him. They get you good? Nothing a week of rest, nanobots and bourbon won't fix. She brushed a thumb across his cheek, the touch almost tender. Then she slipped something into his hand. Thin. Metallic. Familiar. A detonator. Did you count? She asked softly. 60, he murmured. Always 60. She smiled for real this time. It was terrifying. Good boy, she said. Joe leaned close. They think you're here for peace. They always do. Any backup? Marla stood, straightened her robes. Just me. For now. Joe leaned back against the wall, fingers tightening around the device. Let me guess. We're fixing things. Marla's voice was ice and fire. We're breaking them first. Guards called time. Said her visit was over. She smiled, nodded. Let them escort her out. Joe waited until the footsteps faded. He clicked the first switch. Systems responded. Lights dimmed. Security lapsed. The second switch armed the codes he'd hidden in their servers. The third? That would be for later. He lay back, eyes closed, body broken but soul burning. Outside, the storm was coming. And the galaxy, as usual, had no idea what it had done. The first thing Marla McAllister noticed about the slaver camp was how much it pretended to be civilized. The landing pad was smooth and polished, the walls reinforced with local alloy painted in garish Empire gray, and even the armed guards stood at attention like they understood protocol. She stepped off the diplomatic shuttle with the grace of someone who had once commanded orbital bombardments like orchestras, her robes swirling gently in the artificial breeze. She wore the white of Terran diplomacy, edged in silver trim, and an orchid pin on her lapel, a quiet nod to her nickname whispered across war councils and alien command posts. No weapons. No armor. Just a data tablet and that smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A group of Empire officers met her at the edge of the pad, stiff-backed and smug. At the front, Kreth Vornak, tall, scaled, and perpetually convinced of his own importance, stepped forward, his toothy grin wide enough to count each fong. His armor gleamed. His ego radiated. "Ambassador McAllister," he said, voice a purr laced with mockery. "An unexpected pleasure. To what do we owe the honor?" Marla inclined her head just slightly. "General Vornak," she replied, voice smooth as polished glass. "The honor is mine. Though I'm afraid I'm here on a matter of some urgency. My husband, Joseph McAllister, was taken prisoner during a patrol incident. I've come to see to his release." Vornak blinked. "Ah yes, the human mechanic." He chuckled. "A shame. You know how these outer sectors are, no one can keep track of property." "Indeed," she said. "Though we prefer the term citizen." Vornak waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Yes, yes. Titles and such. Still, if you humans left your pets leashed, perhaps they wouldn't wander into military zones." She smiled faintly. "We try to let them stretch their legs. Makes the claws stronger." That earned her a curious glance, but the moment passed. Vornak gestured toward the inner compound. "Come. I'll show you the holding area. You'll see he's in fine health considering. I'm sure you've treated him with all the hospitality your culture allows." Marla walked beside him, mentally cataloging every detail. The guard rotations, the surveillance blind spots, the number of visible turrets, even the spacing of the motion sensors buried along the perimeter. She didn't need blueprints. She'd built a career on improvising with less. Inside, the facility looked less refined. Cracks in the flooring. Bloodstains hastily scrubbed from the corners. A lingering smell of antiseptic and burnt protein. The guards stared at her with a mix of curiosity and hunger. She made a show of ignoring them, but noted each one. "You do know," Vornak said, glancing sideways, "that legally speaking, he is now considered Empire property. Humans in these sectors are not recognized under." "The Terran Federation recognizes him," she said flatly. "Which means I do. Which means if he dies, I'm authorized to respond." Vornak smirked. "With what? Harsh language." Marla smiled again. "If necessary." They reached a holding cell. A guard keyed the panel, and the door hissed open. Inside, her husband sat against the wall, bruised, bloodied, and humming softly to himself. He looked up as she entered, and the smile that spread across his face would have melted titanium. "Hey, gorgeous," Joe rasped. "You look like the cavalry." "You look like roadkill," she replied. "Feel worse." She knelt beside him, brushing hair from his forehead. "They hurt you bad?" "Broke a few things. Took a tooth. One of the back ones, nothing fancy." His eyes flicked to the orchid on her chest, then to the corner of the room where a camera blinked lazily. "You know how it is. Hospitality's a bit rough, but the company's great." "Him," she murmured. "You been counting?" "Always." She slid something into his hand with practiced ease, a small wafer-thin sliver of metal no bigger than a key fragment. He curled his fingers over it without looking. "You brought friends?" He whispered. "Nope." "Seriously?" She smiled. "I brought me." He winced as he leaned forward. "Damn, I love you." "Save it. You still owe me dinner." She rose. The guard cleared his throat, trying not to look nervous. She gave him a polite nod and exited the cell without another word. Outside, Vornak stood waiting, arms folded, tail flicking with amusement. "Touching reunion," he said. "Though I can't imagine what good it did." "It reminded me what's at stake," she replied calmly. "You know, I was expecting a more refined operation." He grunted. "We're efficient." She didn't argue. Instead, she turned her eyes toward the courtyard, where several prisoners were herded through drills by armored guards. One of the prisoners stumbled. A guard shocked him with a stun rod. The man screamed. No one looked twice. Marla watched without emotion. "You run a tight leash." "Fear is an excellent motivator," Vornak said. "So is fury," she murmured. "What was that?" "I said I'm sure your methods yield excellent productivity." He grinned, assuming the compliment was genuine. "They do." As they walked, she passed one of the Skriel officers. Young, awkward, feathers too clean for this kind of post. He looked at her like he wanted to ask something but didn't dare. She made a mental note of him. Useful, maybe. Nervous types always were. Back in the command center, she was offered refreshments, which she declined. Instead, she requested a brief look at the camp's prisoner registry, for diplomatic accuracy. Vornak laughed but indulged her. She skimmed the names. Cross-referenced species. Logged locations. Every detail mattered. As Vornak rattled on about the success of the Empire's slave economy, she let her gaze drift across the holographic map of the sector. The slaver camps were spread thin, linked by fragile communication relays and sluggish transports. A good strike wouldn't just cripple this facility. It'd echo across the rim like a thunderclap. And they'd invited her inside. She turned back to Vornak. "Would you be so kind as to allow me another moment with my husband before I depart? I'd like to give him clarity." The general made a show of pretending to consider. "Fine. But make it quick." "Of course." This time, she didn't enter the cell. She stood outside the force field and looked down at Joe through the shimmer of energy. "I leave in 10 minutes, she said. "Are you ready?" He coughed. "Been ready since they called me monkey. Got everything I need." "You sure?" "You're the only thing I ever needed." She smiled, a real one this time. "Then hold tight." He looked up at the ceiling, lips moving silently. Counting. She turned and walked away, robes sweeping the corridor behind her. Vornak escorted her back to the landing pad himself. "I must say, your Federation puts on a good show. But next time, send someone with teeth." Marla turned to him at the shuttle ramp. "Oh, I have teeth. You'll see." He sneered. "Is that a threat?" "No, General," she said pleasantly. "That's a promise." He laughed. She boarded. The shuttle lifted into the sky, silent and smooth. Back in his command room, Vornak ordered extra patrols. Just in case. He wasn't sure why. There was something in her tone, the way she moved, the things she didn't say. It gnawed at him. In the cell, Joe finished his count. 60. He pressed the wafer-shaped device against the floor plate. It beeped once. Then the lights went out. Across the facility, systems flickered. Comms dropped. Turrets spun blindly. Power relays overloaded. Somewhere deep in the subgrid, code written in a language the Empire had never seen began rewriting their infrastructure line by line. The compound went dark. Guards shouted. Backup lights failed. A siren wailed once before sputtering out. Joe stood slowly. His right shoulder hung awkwardly, but he still smiled. "You idiots really should have read the manual," he muttered. From the distance came an explosion. Sharp. Targeted. Marla had never left orbit. Her shuttle was a decoy, already detached and looping toward the system's second moon. She stood in the shadows now, back in armor painted matte black, blades strapped to her thighs, and an old Terran revolver clipped to her belt. She was in. Through the chaos, she moved like shadow in wind. Guards were down silently. Doors opened at her touch. The camp's defenses had been neutered days ago, quietly, without flair. Joe's sabotage had made sure of it. In the command room, Vornak roared at his staff to re-establish control. Screens showed nothing but static and a blinking orchid icon pulsing with slow inevitability. Then the internal comm system crackled to life. Marla's voice filled every corner. "This is Marla McAllister of the Terran Federation. As of now, this facility is no longer under slaver control." The silence was palpable. "You have approximately 5 minutes to drop weapons, surrender and run. After that, the place becomes complicated." Vornak bellowed orders. None of them worked. Every system rejected him. Joe reached the control panel outside his cell. With a soft buzz, the force field dropped. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck. "Time to go to work." Marla met him in the corridor, her helmet off, eyes like steel. She tossed him a fresh set of clothes, his old pistol, and a med patch. He slapped it on and winced. "Still hurts like hell." "Pain is temporary. Pride is forever. Tell that to my spleen." They moved together, a seamless team. She handled the front. He handled the doors. Every step was calculated. Every guard who fought lasted seconds. The prisoners they passed stared in stunned silence. Some whispered prayers. Others just stared at the human couple carving a path through the Empire's finest. Joe stopped only once, to look at the drone he'd been fixing days ago. "Sorry, sweetheart," he muttered, then blew it up with a well-placed shot. They reached the courtyard. More guards poured in. Joe looked at Marla. "You want subtle or flashy?" She drew the revolver. "Flashy." They delivered. The courtyard lit up with controlled violence. Each shot placed. Each strike deliberate. Even as blood spilled and screams echoed, they never lost that edge of calm professionalism. At one point, Marla pinned a guard and whispered something into his ear. He screamed before she slit his throat. Joe didn't ask. By the time the sun rose on the compound, nothing remained but fire and silence. They stood side by side, breathing hard, clothes torn, bloodied but alive. "You ever think we're the bad guys?" Joe asked. Marla considered it. "Sometimes. But then I remember who hit first." In the center of the burning yard, Joe set up a single broadcast beacon. He activated it. A holographic message projected skyward. To the galaxy, it was just a warning. To the Empire, it was a declaration. To those who had watched humans with amusement and pity, it was a shift in the wind. Marla stared up at the blinking light and smiled. "Let's go home." He took her hand. Behind them, the Empire's false civilization crumbled. And somewhere, across the stars, other humans began to stir. The first explosion was quiet. Controlled. Precision, not panic. It took out the primary comms relay in the northeast tower, silencing the slaver compound's uplink to the outer system. The second was louder, vaporizing the turret array above the barracks before it could track anything moving faster than a breeze. The third wasn't an explosion at all, but a ripple, a blackout that surged through the power grid like a predator's whisper, leaving flickering lights and screaming machinery in its wake. By the time the guards started shouting, it was already too late. Marla moved through the shadows like a story half-believed. Black armor clung to her frame with silent elegance. A thin scar above her left eyebrow, a relic from the Battle of Talon's belt, glinted faintly beneath the dim emergency lighting. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her work did all the talking. The facility's central spine, the control corridor, had been designed to intimidate. Cold, sterile alloy. Angular lights. Echoes that stretched and warped the shape of footsteps. It had been meant to remind the prisoners they were small. It reminded Marla that the Empire didn't understand fear at all. 2 guards rounded a corner ahead of her. They didn't even get to aim. A knife hit the first one just beneath the second vertebra, a perfect gap in the armor. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The second gaped, turned to run, too slow. Marla closed the distance and struck once, fast and brutal, and his helmet crumpled with a sickening crunch. She kept walking. The compound was a maze of outdated tech and lazy design. Joe's earlier sabotage had opened dozens of backdoors. Hatch codes changed, camera loops overwritten, door locks left with just enough lag to become liabilities. It wasn't just infiltration. It was surgical disassembly. Down in the sublevel maintenance corridor, Joe tapped a few final lines of code into a wall console and grinned through a wince. "Security logs are toast," he muttered. "Backup drives'll think the base threw itself a surprise party." He leaned against the wall, chest heaving. His ribs still screamed with every breath, but he moved anyway. There were worse things than pain. Footsteps. Familiar ones. Heavy, sure, but with a dancer's cadence. Marla appeared in the archway, face streaked with grime and blood. Joe straightened, half smiling. "You look awful," he said. "You're limping." "Match set." She tossed him a small energy pack and pulled him to his feet. "Command center's 2 levels up. Vornax probably locked himself in by now." "Got the fireworks set?" Marla nodded. 2 plasma cells and a grudge." He chuckled, winced. "That's my girl." Together they moved, one silent, one limping, both deadly. The halls buzzed with distant yelling, confused footsteps, and the telltale crackle of failing circuits. Panic bloomed in the structure like rot. On the upper deck, Kreth Vornak watched the chaos unfold on what few monitors still worked. His talons scratched the edge of his command chair as he barked orders that nobody followed. The comms hissed with static. His tail lashed in agitation. "This is impossible," he snarled. "One shuttle. No strike team. No fleet. How are they doing this?" The Skriel officer, young, feathers disheveled, eyes too wide, stood by the door, visibly trembling. "Sir," the Skriel began, "the internal sensors. Override them." "I can't. The human's code, it's learning." Vornak turned slowly. "Learning?" "It's adapting, sir. Rewriting protocols midstream." "I've never." Vornak struck the console. Sparks flared. "She said she came alone," he hissed. "She did," the Skriel whispered. "That's what scares me." Another explosion rocked the structure. The lights dimmed again. Vornak drew his sidearm. "Fine. If the witch wants to play ghosts, let her. I'll bury her with my own hands." He didn't notice the orchid symbol pulsing in the corner of the remaining screen, tiny, pale, and blooming across system after system. In the lower stairwell, Marla led the way with a tempo that said she had done this 100 times. Joe followed, weapon drawn, steps measured. His hand trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. Still, his eyes burned bright. "Remind me to retire after this," he said. "Sure," she said. "After the rim's cleared." He smirked. "So never then." They reached the upper hall. 2 guards flanked the command doors, clearly terrified but trained enough to stand their ground. Marla strode toward them without a word. "Halt!" One barked. She didn't. "Stop or we open fire." She reached them in 3 more steps. One fired, too slow. The shot glanced off her armor as she swept his legs out, jabbed her elbow into his throat, and twisted his rifle from his grip in one motion. The second hesitated. Joe shot him through the kneecap. The man screamed and dropped. Joe stepped over him with a grunt. Inside the command center, Vornak spun as the doors slid open. Marla entered first, calm and silent. Vornak aimed his pistol at her head. "You take one more step." She stopped, titled her head. "You have exactly 3 rounds left. And I move faster than that. Do I look like a fool to you?" He growled. She said nothing. Joe stepped in behind her, gun raised. "Honestly, you look like a lizard having a really bad Thursday." "McAllister," Vornak spat. "You should be dead." "You say that like you're disappointed." Marla moved. One breath, one blink, and she was there, inside his guard, slapping the pistol aside, driving a palm into his chest hard enough to stagger him. He roared, claws slashing. She ducked, pivoted, and swept his legs. He crashed to the ground with a furious hiss. "You invaded Empire territory," he snarled. "You enslaved Terran citizens," she replied. "We own this sector." "Not anymore." He lunged. She caught his arm, twisted, and drove his own sidearm into his stomach. One shot. He gasped. Slumped. She crouched beside him, voice low. You thought we were small. Harmless. Entertaining. You thought you could break him and I'd just leave. Vornak tried to speak. Blood bubbled at his lips. You didn't realize, she continued. Humans don't let family bleed alone. She stood, wiped her hands and looked at Joe. You okay? He nodded, slowly. Getting there. They moved to the main console. Joe tapped in a command string. The system resisted, then collapsed into compliance. Across the screens, slave collar protocols began shutting down. Alarms fell silent. Locks disengaged. One by one, doors opened. Prisoners stepped into hallways, blinking in confusion. Marla activated the external broadcast node. A holographic relay sprang to life. She looked into the lens, her face cold, clear and undeniable. To the Galactic Empire and any slavers still watching, she said. This compound has been dismantled. Its leaders neutralized. Its victims freed. She paused. This is not a negotiation. This is a reckoning. Behind her, firelight flickered from distant explosions. Joe limped into frame, rifle resting on one shoulder. Marla continued. Humanity asked for peace. We were mocked. We asked for recognition. We were ignored. We asked you not to hurt our people. Her eyes narrowed. You chose poorly. The feed cut. In the silence that followed, Joe leaned against the console and exhaled. You really know how to make an exit. She grinned. We're not done. He frowned. You planning something else? Always. Together, they walked out of the command room, leaving Vornak's body cooling on the floor. In the yard, freed prisoners gathered. Humans, yes, but other species too, Nkari, Skrill, even a few synthetic hybrids. They looked at Marla and Joe with awe, confusion, and something deeper. Hope. A Skrill woman stepped forward. You're not here to take over? Marla shook her head. We're not here to rule. We're here to end the ones who think they have the right to. Joe raised a hand. You all want out? Follow us. We're heading for the main hangar. They didn't hesitate. As the makeshift convoy moved through the now silent corridors, Joe fell in step beside Marla. They're going to send someone after us, he said. Let them. And when they do? We'll remind them what it costs to touch a McAllister. Outside, the sun was rising over the compound ruins, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the dirt. Smoke curled into the sky. Debris littered the yard, and the only thing standing tall was the Terran beacon, its orchid symbol glowing faintly, defiant and still. Marla looked out at the horizon. Somewhere out there, the Empire was reeling. Somewhere, alarms were screaming, and admirals were scrambling to understand how two humans had just dismantled an entire operation overnight. She smiled without humor. Good. Let them scramble. Let them remember. Because the Orchid Widow had woken, and she wasn't going back to sleep. The transmission looped on every known frequency. Each time, the face of a woman stared out. Calm, unblinking, framed by war fire and ruin. Behind her, a Terran flag twisted in smoke. Her voice was deliberate, measured, terrifying in its simplicity. This is not a negotiation. This is a reckoning. Across the stars, from diplomatic halls to slave ports, from military decks to shadow markets, the message played over and over. Systems tried to block it. They failed. Filters rewrote themselves. Firewalls dissolved. Even secure Empire nodes found the file sitting smugly in their top-level directories like a bloodstained note. The galaxy watched in silence. In the cold central chamber of the Galactic Strategic Core, Grand Minister Thelos stared at the display with sunken eyes. Around him, admirals shifted, whispered, fidgeted. She came alone, he said at last. She did, replied Admiral Syrian, adjusting his long, scale-patched coat. Her husband assisted, but this was orchestrated by her alone. One ship. No fleet. No warning. No casualties among the human civilians? None. All accounted for. All freed. Thelos steepled his fingers. And our forces? Syrian hesitated. 87 confirmed dead. Dozens more injured. Entire compound decommissioned. Command systems corrupted. Perimeter data erased. Thelos leaned forward. And the slaves? Scattered. Many fled with the humans. Others turned on their guards. Some sectors are still under lockdown. Lockdown. Thelos's voice was soft. You mean chaos? Controlled chaos. But yes. The chamber fell into a heavy hush. No one said the obvious. They'd underestimated humanity. Again. Admiral Syrian broke the silence. We recommend an immediate retaliatory strike on the Terran border colonies. It will remind them of their place. Strike where? A soft voice asked from the far end of the room. All eyes turned. High Chancellor Irene Vex, rarely present at military briefings, stood with her hands clasped behind her back. Her eyes glowed faintly violet in the low light. An Avirani by birth, she was known for sharp logic and a reputation for dissecting political corpses before they hit the floor. Which colony? She repeated. Earth? The Mars shipyards? The outer fringe outposts? Which one are we going to hit to make our point, Admiral? Syrian stiffened. Any of them. All of them. And provoke a full war? They've already declared one, Chancellor. Irene tapped a slender finger against her wrist console. A second display flickered on, this one showing a different feed. A clip of the aftermath. Not of fire, but of crowds. Slaves of every species cheering the human operatives. Alien prisoners swearing loyalty to Earth. One even knelt before the Orchid Widow like she was some kind of prophet. This isn't just a military issue, she said. It's cultural contagion. They're not just winning battles, they're becoming symbols. Symbols we let flourish. And what would you suggest? Thelos asked. She turned to him. Contain it. Thelos arched a brow. Meaning? Truth suppression. Control the narrative. Paint her as a terrorist. Discredit their marriage. Suggest mind control, rogue AI, Terran extremism. Anything that keeps the galaxy from admiring her. Syrian scoffed. No one will believe that. Enough will, she replied. Truth matters less than volume. Volume won't fix a burned outpost. No, she said. But a war won't fix a reputation collapse. Thelos leaned back. And if they strike again? Irene gave a tight smile. Then we blink first. On the other side of known space, Marla McAllister stood beneath a starlit sky, wind brushing the loose strands of her braid against her cheek. The ruins of the compound still smoked behind her. Around her the rescued gathered, an odd mosaic of species and dialects and broken things now slowly reforging themselves into something new. Joe sat nearby, cleaning a plasma pistol and humming off-key. Got a ping, he muttered. Marla looked over. Friend or foe? Encrypted bounce from FleetCom. Terran signature. Real deal. She walked over. The message was short. Widow. Empire pulling back. Stay dark. Second string incoming. Congrats. You broke them. Command. She read it twice. They're retreating, she said. Joe leaned back against a crate. Hell of a honeymoon, huh? She snorted. This wasn't even the wedding. Around them, the camp slowly transformed into something more than rubble. Makeshift shelters went up. Droids, reprogrammed from patrol duty, now assisted in building instead of punishing. The freed Skrill faction formed an impromptu perimeter network, while Nkari refugees established hydroponic zones. Even the grumpy avian mercenary Joe, had nearly shot on the first day, now ran basic logistics. It wasn't pretty, but it was functional. And it was spreading. Whispers drifted out. Quiet stories about the woman who didn't blink, and the mechanic who hummed through hell. About how humans smiled when they fought, and laughed while they bled. About how kindness was real, but had teeth. On a back channel, a message arrived. No encryption. Just text. I saw you. I heard the transmission. I'm not with them anymore. I want to help. Joe read it aloud. That from the Skrill officer? Probably. You trust him? I trust what he's afraid of. Joe nodded slowly. You think this spreads? Marla looked up at the sky. I think it's already spreading. In a distant pirate den, a mercenary captain watched the looped broadcast and didn't laugh. In a Terran orphanage on a mining moon, a child pressed her hand to the screen when Marla's face came on. In a prison cell in the Farland sector, a slave smiled for the first time in years. And in the deep corridors of a hidden Terran facility, agents watched footage of the burned camp and began charting the next step. Tactical analysts debated the McAllister Protocol. Black Ops teams requested deployment under the Widow Doctrine. Someone even suggested giving her a fleet. The proposal wasn't laughed out of the room. Joe adjusted his toolkit and stood. You ready to go? Marla stretched. Where? Does it matter? She looked at the sky again. No. But let's leave them something to remember us by. An hour later, the camp beacon triggered one last transmission. It was short. Just a human woman's voice and the soft sound of a breeze. We're not coming to conquer. We're coming to remind you who we are. Then silence. The Empire tried to bury it. Officials denied it. News feeds redirected. Propaganda was spun. It didn't matter. They blinked. And when the Empire blinked, it gave the humans room to move. They moved. Quietly at first. One outpost here. One prison broken open there. Then faster. Refugees carried the code. Former slaves became couriers. Human diplomats began to arrive in sectors once closed to Terrans, and behind every handshake was a whisper. If you touch one of ours again, we'll rewrite your history. The galaxy had expected warmongers. Instead, they got strategists. Smiling, charming, violently polite strategists. Marla and Joe disappeared off official records for a time. No signals. No sightings. Just rumors. One tale said they boarded a freighter bound for the Varn Belt and dismantled an entire slave auction before breakfast. Another claimed Marla had infiltrated a Galactic Council masquerade and danced with a High Chancellor before dropping him unconscious on the banquet table. Joe, apparently, ran a bar somewhere in a floating wreck that used to be a dreadnought. His drinks were strong. His stories were stronger. But when the Empire's agents looked into the chaos, trying to find patterns in the mayhem, one name always surfaced. McAllister. Sometimes with a first name. Sometimes not. Always with fear. In time, the Empire did what it always did. It spun a new myth. A ghost story. They said she was vengeance incarnate. That she wasn't human at all, but some rogue AI dressed in flesh. That she could disable a fleet with a stare, and dissolve a soldier with a whisper. That she had no home, no sleep, no soul, only fury and orchids. The humans never corrected them. Because fear, like silence, was a useful tool. And Marla? She wore the myth like a second skin. Joe handed her a new coat one evening. Black, reinforced, stitched with the Terran crest, and a tiny white bloom just above the heart. She slipped it on. Still fits, he said. It always did. In a small outpost not yet marked on any map they waited. The stars above them pulsed with the same ancient light they always had, unaware of the seismic shift playing out below. Refugees came. Messages arrived. More nodes went dark. More camps fell. It wasn't fast. It wasn't loud. But it was relentless. Marla looked over at Joe as he adjusted a transmitter. You think they'll ever understand us? He didn't look up. They don't need to. They think we're monsters. He smirked. Then they finally get it. She laughed, dry and quiet. We didn't start this. No, he said. But we're damn sure finishing it. Behind them, a young freed engineer was aligning a field generator. An Kari child was painting symbols on the walls, ones they said would ward off Empire scouts. A Skriel healer was tending to an injured reptilian who used to wear an Empire badge. The humans stood at the center of it, not leading. Just being. And the galaxy learned to watch their smiles very, very carefully. Because the Empire had blinked. And the McAllisters hadn't.